Yes, welcome to my first in a series on Theron Q. Dumont's book titled Personal Magnetism. And I'm going to start with what he calls the definition of personal magnetism. He wrote, perhaps the best definition is the following: the strong, notice I said strong, peculiar, but little understood power, force, or influence exerted by certain individuals in varying degrees by the means of which other persons are attracted to, controlled by, dominated, or influenced by the individuals or the individual possessing the power. A form of mental influence exerted by certain individuals over those with whom they come into contact. He wrote, the principal objection that I personally have to do above otherwise fairly good definition, or the definition I just talked about, is it implies that only certain individuals possess personal magnetism. The implication being that the remainder of the race are devoid of it. This, in my opinion, is a sad mistake, he writes. The truth is, each and every individual is in possession of a certain degree of personal magnetism. And I've talked about this before. Some people have negative personal magnetism that repels people away from them. That might be some of you listening to me. So he writes that each person may increase the degree and strengthen the power by knowledge and practice. Even the most unmagnetic person possesses personal magnetism, perhaps even to a considerable degree, but is generally so ignorant of the nature of the force by the means of its employment that he or she actually repels other persons instead of attracting them. He writes, 4. Do not fail to note this fact. Personal magnetism, like material magnetism, may repel as well as attract. It has its positive as well as its negative side. Many very repellent persons are really manifesting a high degree of personal magnetism in a negative form and are driving away persons from them in the same manner that others attract persons to them. It is all a matter of the use of the power. The fact is that every person generates and throws off a certain degree, varying among different individuals, of personal magnetism, which affects the minds of other persons coming within the field of its influence. Now, they're talking about swag, what we call swag today, or aura. He writes, not only does each person emanate and project a certain amount or degree of personal magnetism, additionally, each person is also constantly surrounded by a field of personal magnetic influence, a personal atmosphere, so to speak. You've heard girls talk about, well, there was just something about his vibe, either positive or negative. There was just something about him, either positive or negative, right? As we know, women are more intuitive and they're more open to the feeling and connection to energy than we are. So if we learn to broadcast a positive energy, they will become more attracted to us. That's why confidence, lack of fear, self-esteem are vitally important. Your inner game is vitally important because you're constantly broadcasting. Every day you go out into the world, you are broadcasting a signal to other people around you. Try getting in a really pissed off mood and go outside. Don't tell me that you won't have people asking, what's wrong with you today? Are you pissed off? Okay, try that. You'll see. People will pick up on it. Now, continuing. He writes, this personal atmosphere varies greatly in degrees of strength, and that's what we want to do, is increase our power, or strength, extent and general character among different individuals. The average person has but a weak personal atmosphere which extends but a short distance on all sides of them, while the strong characters of the race are surrounded by a widely spread personal atmosphere of great power, especially when they are aroused by any strong emotion, feeling, or desire. The personal atmosphere of these strong individuals, who are generally recognized as leaders of the race, usually extends great distances from the person and is fairly saturated with strong dynamic magnetism, which impresses itself strongly upon those coming within their field of influence. Now, when I was studying acting, they taught us exercises, and I've also studied Theron Dumont's book on how to project my aura, my energy, out into a room of people. And I used that when I was giving speeches. I used that when I went to nightclubs, as I've talked about. He writes, but even the weaker individuals of the race, or using personal magnetism unconsciously, exert at least some degree of influence upon those around them, either positive or negative fellows. My one buddy, he had the ability to almost disappear. Okay? We would go into a nightclub and women would have no recollection of him being right next to me. I've heard that multiple times because he was so busy trying to hide himself. He writes, it requires but a moment's thought to recognize that some persons emanate an atmosphere of good cheer, brightness, and happiness, which affects in a desirable way all persons with whom they come into contact with. You notice how people are positive? We feel good to be around them, right? But just think about if you're carrying around that negative energy within you. You're angry because you're alone. Women don't like you. Women don't find you attractive. So you carry around that whole sack of bad feelings around you. And it's no wonder why women won't like you, because you're doing all that inner damage to yourself. You're damaging your inner core inside, and that's reflecting outwards. As I said before, so it is within, so it is without. The way it is on the outside is the way it is on the inside, because you're projecting that outward. You're projecting that energy, that attitude, the thoughts, your aura, your swag. You're creating the outer effect of that. Does that now make sense? He continues, others in the same way are surrounded by an atmosphere of gloom, as I talked about, pessimism, and discouragement, which adversely affects persons coming near them. These things are too common to even excite interest among the average persons, but in this phenomena may be found the key to the higher forms of personal magnetism. We are so accustomed to regarding personal magnetism as meaning only the positive, attractive phase that it comes as a shock to some of us to be told that the repelling personal atmosphere is equally magnetic. That means my one buddy was very powerful also, because he had the ability to hide and disappear. Whereas I developed my ability to be seen and noticed. Continuing. That is magnetic in the wrong direction. So they're talking about the repelling people. They're magnetic in the wrong direction. He continues, this should cause no wonder when we remember that even the physical metallic magnet repels under certain circumstances as strongly as it attracts under others, meaning other circumstances. There are, it is true, certain individuals who seem neither to attract nor repel. But this does not affect the general rule. These neutral individuals are usually of weak magnetism and weak character. That is to say, they have no strong motives, aims, or desires, or strong cast of character or personality. Each faculty of the mentality is neutralized by some other faculty of equal strength, and the result is a neutral condition akin to lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold. It follows naturally that such persons exert but a neutral influence and have but a weak, neutral personal atmosphere. They neither attract nor repel. They simply bore persons with whom they come into contact with. He continues, some may raise the question that if, as I have said, each and every person is possessed of personal magnetism, then why should anyone bother any more about the matter or study the subject of personal magnetism at all? Such a question, and it's frequently raised for that matter, causes a smile to manifest on the features of those who have knowledge of the subject. So childish does it seem to them. While it is true that each and every person is possessed of personal magnetism to some degree, it is equally true that the majority of persons have but a weak magnetic force, and that often a negative or undesired character. He's saying that most people are weak, and they have either a negative or undesirable character. Continuing. And it is a fact positively known to those who have mastered the subject that even the weakest and most negative person may so develop his or her personal magnetism as to gradually acquire the same degree and character of magnetism as possessed by many individuals originally far in advance of them in magnetic influence. He continues, one may completely change the character of his personal magnetism from negative to positive, as you have seen or heard me do in my life. Remember me telling you that I hated being black? Think about it. I hated being the race I was. Think of how negative that is. Really think about that. Really, if you're Caucasian, absorb that. At one time in my life, I hated being black. Now I'm proud. I enjoy being black. So I turned from negative to positive. I thought back then that people did not like me, that women did not like me. I don't know how I got the girlfriend I had, well, actually was my wife at the time. Actually, I got it through actually going out there trying to do something, trying to get a girlfriend. But after that, shortly after that, I became so negative because I was so down on myself because I'd gotten married under dubious circumstances. My first son was 7 months gestating in the womb. I felt like my life was over. I turned inwards into negativity, and that self-awareness of being African American here in the United States back in the early 80s really exacerbated it. It really grew out of proportion. Back then, a lot of bad stuff was happening to black people, as it did before when I was growing up, but it just seemed to minutely focus in my mind, all because I was in a negative space. I went from positive to negative. Actually, I never had been positive before that, because I come from a dysfunctional environment. Okay? So he says one can change from positive to negative, and that is good news. That means there's hope for everyone out there. One may completely change the character of his personal magnetism from negative to positive, from undesirable to desirable, he continues, by carefully studying, practicing along the lines which I shall lay down in this book, he writes. Moreover, it is possible for any person possessing sufficient will, perseverance, and determination to develop from a puny state of magnetism to a condition of gigantic magnetic powers. That's all about attraction. So you can go from being unattractive, from low magnetism to strong magnetism. But if you look at the words I'm about to share with you in this upcoming series, it's all about developing yourself, your concentration, your willpower. This is not for gamer types. This is not for the 80% to look for magic answers. This requires hard focus, hard work that I did many, many years ago. That's why I say there's no magic out there. It's only your own personal power. He continues, but this latter requires determination, constant practice until a certain stage is reached, and an indomitable will. There it is, as I just said. Continuing, while anyone may easily increase his or her degree of power of personal magnetism, and still more easily change the character of one's personal atmosphere, the higher prizes are reserved for those who will persevere to the end and continue faithful with the exercises. This, of course, is true not only of personal magnetism, but also of every other thing worth having. There is no royal road to anything worth having. They said that way back in 1907, I believe, when this book was written. Basically, that means nothing good ever came easy. There are no magic answers. Continuing. We must work for what we get. Do you hear that? You have to work for what you want, for what you get. There's no immediate PUA answers, no magic openers, no boyfriend destroyers. That does not really exist. They knew that back in 1910. It is still true today. This I will say, however, success must and will be yours if you will follow the instructions carefully, persistently, and perseveringly. This is all I can do for you. The rest is in your own hands. I know how he feels. Stay tuned for upcoming chapters as we continue down the road of personal magnetism. I'll see you in the next show, fellas.